Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and begin. First, I want to address the elephant in the room. All right, the thing that I know it's all on your minds, and you're all like, tremendously agitated about. And I thought I would just go ahead and address it right now, and that's Sora and Smash Brothers. Right? How do we feel about that? All right. No one's ever, Sakurai can't make everybody happy with his character selections, but I thought that one was one that would, please the majority of people. It seems like. Alas, the I was pushing for the Wii Music characters, but no one said. Anyone remember Wii Music? Wii Music. Golden game. Yeah, so I agree. So Wii Music, I actually thought was if you don't know what Wii Music is, because obviously you would have been like kids, right? Like way back then. It was like supposed to be the next big thing on the Wii, right? You had Wii Sports, you had Wii Fit, and then Wii Music was going to be the next big, like Nintendo changes the world with this software. And it was a kind of a dud, but yeah, I loved it. I thought it was great. I remember fighting some battles. Obviously not this kind of battle, more like the mouth talking type of battle about Wii Music, only because as a musician myself, I understood what they were doing and I loved it. Right. So what I'll say about Wii Music is that obviously I like, Guitar Hero and Rock Band and sort of your standard rhythm game design, which is, you see the symbols and, you kind of line them up with your eyes and press the button at the right time, right? That's what that gameplay is. Most rhythm gameplay is like this. And it works really well, right? But what Wii Music was trying to do, they weren't doing that. It wasn't like a rhythm game setup. They were trying to simulate what it was like being in a band where you're sort of listening to the other musicians and kind of improvising, right? Because they would, you would improvise in Wii Music, and they very cleverly crafted it so that the notes you would play, they would all fit in the key that you were in at the time. And so it was really a game about collaboration and with these AI musical characters and improvisation. And they're really trying to simulate what it really is to be a musician. Like when I play Rock Band, it's like what they're doing is they're teaching you to be very precise, right? Like to kind of learn a rhythm and to be very precise with the rhythm. Wii Music was attempting to simulate actually really being a musician. Now the problem is, and this is going to be something that I talk about in 105 soon, I think, is there's always this difference between a simulation and a game, right? Like sometimes doing simulating something well doesn't make it fun, and that was where I found it fun because I saw what they're doing, right, and I kind of understood it. But I think the average gamer was like, "What in the world is this?" And yeah, Michael. Yeah, yeah. Yes, yeah, it's hard for non-musical people to get into Wii Music. The other thing that was, I think, a huge knock against it is they because of the way the game is constructed, where it's adapting, like it's allowing you to play these things, but it's never, a note's not supposed to be wrong. It had to be flexible, so it used MIDI, right? It used MIDI, not pre-recorded tracks, and so the perception was, wow, the sound quality is bad, right? Because it's MIDI, but it's MIDI because it had to be adaptive because MIDI is just data, right? You can change it on the fly as opposed to pre-recorded stuff. Anyway, I didn't expect to be talking about Wii Music. Actually, that was just a complete random thing. So let's open up the PowerPoint for today, and that's fine because I suspect that this might be one of my shorter ones. So it's no biggie that we spent this extra time out front here. So let's talk about world design today. Um, More kind of single player oriented topics, more immersive sim oriented topics. Okay, so what is world design? It's kind of a big field, okay, and I'm quoting myself here, which is kind of funny. Sort of, if you've ever seen that, yeah. Oh, right. Thank you. Screens were not on in West Lafayette. Okay, there we go. Uh, so yeah, I'm quoting myself here. you didn't miss, this is the second slide, so you didn't miss anything. The first slide is just the title. So anyway, yeah, I'm quoting myself. If you've ever seen the meme of President Obama putting a medal on himself, this is it always feels like this when I get to this slide. But I think it's a good encapsulation of what world design is: the combination, planned architecture, nature, visual style, and function of a game world. It also involves auditory information. Simply put, is everything experiential about a play space. That's world design, right? It's everything about the world that you're building that you experience in a game. All the things together working in concert. Okay, so what I like to do when I talk about world design is look at sports stadiums, because there was kind of a way that sports stadiums was made in the 70s versus how they're made today. And I can use that as kind of an analogy of kind of good world design versus not having world design in a game environment, because a sports stadium is a game environment, right, of a sort. Okay, so what we're looking at here is we're looking at the Pontiac Silverdome. That's the interior of it. So that it's demolished now, and actually in true Detroit Lions fashion, when they went to they were going to demolish it. This was like maybe 5 or 6 years ago now. With the whole, we're going to pack TNT in various places, and everyone kind of watches, and someone presses the button, and and they implode it, right? They blow it up and it collapses. Well, in true Detroit Lions fashion, they pressed the button, the explosions happened, nothing. Stadium didn't move, didn't collapse. They failed to blow up their own stadium. If you're a Detroit Lions fan, this won't surprise you. They don't do anything right, and they haven't in like 70 years, including just blowing something up. But yeah, this is the interior of the Pontiac Silverdome. Very boring. This is just a container for gameplay, basically. It's all a space like this is doing, right? You just have the football field and tons and tons and tons of seats in which to watch the game happen. Okay, so again, there are a lot of stadiums in the 70s, not just in Pontiac, Michigan, that were built this way. Okay, and again, this is them failing to blow it up. Actually, that's them after they pushed the button. The ceiling had already gone away at that point. Okay, so let's contrast that with something that started in the 1990s, and you see this first with baseball stadiums, but now, like, all stadiums are built like this. So this is Camden Yards in Baltimore, and it's either Camden Yards or Jacobs Field. I think it's Camden Yards. So anyway, what they did here is, you can see, it's not just a dull container for gameplay. Notice how they work in the city, right? It's supposed to be experiential. So it's not just a huge box to watch a baseball game. You're actually taking in the city. They even incorporate this warehouse. It's basically one of the walls of the stadium, this pre-existing building. You can see they have the lights attached there at the top. And so really, when you go to these newer stadiums, most of them are like this now. They're really meant, yes, you watch the game, but you also have an experience, right? They have theme park elements to them. I know Comerica Park in Detroit, where they play baseball. There's a Ferris wheel there, and there's things that you do when you walk through. So it's a world now, right? And there's world design happening in these stadiums. So yeah, like I was saying, dome stadiums are built. These 1970s era sort of stadiums, I don't think there's any left anymore. They've all been, I think, disused and taken apart and everything. It's like when you make a level layout that doesn't have any world design, right? It's only providing a container for that gameplay. And so as stadiums evolved, they started incorporating city skyline, existing buildings, and they became more experiential in nature. So world design is not just the layout, right? The layout, when you're working on a map in a game, you're thinking about the spatial relationships to directly control the moment-to-moment gameplay, right? World design takes that. That's a part of world design, but you're adding all these other things, right? Architecture, city planning, set dressing, and really everything else to increase immersion, believability, verisimilitude, a favorite word of mine, just means realism, okay? So that's what world design is. It's moving beyond just gameplay layout stuff. It's everything else kind of on top of that. So world design, if just doing a level layout, you're just focusing directly on, okay, I know that my player character has a mid-range machine gun, so I have to make sure I have like medium-sized sight lines and oh, but what about that one part where they have a shotgun? I have to have that is the direct experience, right? The direct moment-to-moment experience. World design is thinking about the indirect experience that I totally misspelled here. I've been doing these for years, and I still miss these somehow. That's incredible. I'm going to make a quick note to fix that because that's a horrible one. Sorry about that, folks. So hold on, just fix world design lecture. That is frustrating. Okay. So while level layouts focus, again, like I said, on moment-to-moment gameplay, all right, it doesn't focus on these other broader things: world simulation, narrative, other indirect aspects of play. When you were working on your deathmatch levels, you're not really thinking, and this is fine, actually. I encourage this, right, because especially the Quake 3 type stuff that some of you were doing. You're not thinking about how normal humans would use the space if it wasn't about blowing each other up, right? And that's another aspect of world design. You're thinking about how regular human beings that aren't engaged in the gameplay would use the space like in real life, right? And you're making adjustments to the world based on that. That's kind of a big part of world design. When you're doing your deathmatch, you're definitely thinking more of a pure gameplay only mode, which is fine for the deathmatch, right? But when you think about different types of games, the immersive sims you're working on, other certainly open world games, when you think about even a game that's a fantasy game, but there has to be some level of verisimilitude, it's really important to think about these other things as well. Okay, so let's talk about some kind of small scale world design techniques, little things, easy things that I think can be done by anybody. Okay, so here's one. This word's almost it's almost a cliche now, but it's still important. Like level designers, if you happen to, this would be an amazing accomplishment if you go to a bar and it's all filled with level designers drinking together. That would be kind of amazing. But pretend that that's happening. They would be joking about this. This is what every junior candidate says to sound smart, but it's still really important to understand. Mise en scène. Okay, mise en scène is telling a story with the environment and how you arrange the environment. The kind of non-jargony way of addressing this is set dressing, right? So either term is fine. If you want to impress your friends, say mise en scène. All right. If you want to actually be understood by people, say set dressing. All right. So it's a very efficient tool for storytelling. Since you don't have to have cutscenes or voice acting or motion capture and all this. In the PowerPoint, there is a link. I did a whole podcast episode on this set dressing idea with my environment artist friend, since we both tend to do that quite a bit. So when you look at the BioShock games, and actually we're going to be talking about BioShock in depth next week, is like that's an old game, but that will be new content, right? I used to teach another. I used to do another game in that spot, but I decided to change it up this year. These games are really famous for mise en scène. There's a whole lot of that, right? If you look at the screenshot, actually, tell me story elements you can get just by looking at this. Yes. Yeah, the kind of state of the world, the fact that it's decayed and broken, that's definitely giving us some narrative clues. Other things that this screenshot tells us about the narrative.
The poster on the wall.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
The poster on the wall.
Yeah, that's right. And there, you could see that the state of this world when it kind of went to ruin. They were having a masquerade and ball for the new year of 1959, right? And so we can kind of infer that whatever happened, it happened then because no one bothered to take down those seasonal pictures So yes, that's another good one. Other mise-en-scène elements here. Yeah. Yeah, there's some kind of disturbing elements, right? That tells you that not that things aren't right here, right? I mean, the baby stroller just left out, obviously. The corpse, right? That's just sitting there, and so yeah, there's a number of things that we can get just by looking around without any dialogue or anything like that. Now, I'll say that the sort of stereotypical mise en scène that everyone now kind of laughs about is the whole like dead body with message written in blood, right? That's like, if I were going to make a joke about mise en scène, that's the joke, right? That's the thing that everyone does, right? In Bioshock Infinite, I mean, the game starts out that way. You go into the lighthouse thing and you see the dead guy and there's the message in blood there, right? That's like, that's almost that's like the audio log of mise en scène. It's that stereotypical at this point. Okay, so another small scale technique is symbology. Now, does anyone recognize where these symbols come from? That guess, it's not quite right, but it's kind of along the right path, right? You're kind of in the right sort of direction, rough direction. I'll give everyone a hint. Think Ridley Scott. Yes, yes, you said it. Yes, it's from Aliens. Yes, this is these are the symbols that they developed for spaceships in the Alien universe, right? To indicate, it's kind of hard to read on the slide, the labels here, but like you'll see things like this is the symbol for airlock here, for instance, and these are consistently used throughout. And what's cool about symbology like this is, I doubt most viewers would know what the symbols actually mean. But when you use them consistently, your brain starts connecting the dots, and it just kind of it gives a logic to the world, right? When you develop these sort of symbols and use them consistently. And I think in this, that's one of the things that franchise does, I think, quite well. And you see these throughout. I think you even see them in Alien Isolation. If that game that's more of a survival horror type aliens experience, you see these sorts of symbols everywhere. All right, so another world design element is level architecture. So making sure things reflect real life dimensions. Now, here's where we have to balance, right? We've talked about often this notion of like when you're making a game, sometimes you don't always make things exactly like real life, and we see that with doors a lot of the times, right? Doors tend to need to be a little bit bigger in real life. So you always have to be balancing this with the gameplay. But depending on what type of game you're making, you may want to pay a lot of attention to the depth and width of stairwells, fire escapes, sidewalk widths, all this. Whenever you want, again, it's like how much realism are you going for, right? Uh, in order to create the immersion. And also, there's other genres of game making where this becomes very important. Actually, right here in Lafayette, we have CRLT, Crisis Response Leadership Training. They make games that are, training, first responders and such. I was just visiting there on Friday, actually, really cool studio. Um, and definitely keep them on your radar because they're a local developer, which is amazing that we have one. But yeah, in their game products, since they're training simulations, they have to get everything exactly right, like exactly right. So it's for them this is a critical thing they must get right. Whereas when we're making an entertainment product, we can bend, but again, depending on the type of game you're making, you may want to have a little bit more realism. Okay, so now let's talk about some larger scale world design techniques. Okay, so virtual city planning. So uh, this is trying to look at real life city planning and trying to emulate this when you're laying out a city. Um, again, you're looking at the function of, when you look at any real city, you can usually identify like things like, oh, they obviously built things along a river for a reason, right? Like actually you see that a lot with bodies of water. And kind of trying to find those clues in how cities are designed, and then trying to bring that into your work when you're laying out a game city, right? And so it's really a study of urban functions, right? What a city does. So kind of the basics of this is a city provides access to water, shelter, food, and it's sort of organized around that principle. And more aspects that would influence this, the time period your city is in, because there have been different kind of approaches to city planning. And in fact, I'm sure this is going to change again, right? Because of the pandemic and everything. Like some of what I have in this lecture, I think it's in this lecture, sort of are things that were like pre-pandemic thinking. And now I think it's going to like change again because of that. Uh, but you have different districts, right? You have red light districts, you have residential districts, you have commercial districts. There are different models of city planning, concentric, district-based, etc. So this is an area, again, where you may want to spend some time in independent study looking at these types of things. Okay, so the goals of virtual city building and planning are, of course, it still has to be compatible with gameplay. You're trying to increase immersion. You're trying to make things more believable, right? When I play the Yakuza games, which you should know by now if you've taken a few of my classes, I'm huge fans of, they do a really good job of this, right? I mean, they took a real life district in Tokyo, and they made a fictionalized version of it. But I mean, they laid it out exactly like the real life version, where you have the little section with the little whiskey bars, little tiny streets, everything's packed in close. You have the larger streets where you have the pachinko parlors and everything. Everything is laid out, with the kind of function of that district, which is sort of entertainment. And so it's also kind of a red light district. You have the bars. Everything's kind of laid out to reflect the function of that area, which is sort of, to be frank, vice, basically, right? Like, sort of sketchy entertainment. The whole district is laid out for that purpose. Okay, so if you want to read more about this, go to this website here. The fellow that runs this, that's his jam, is this sort of thing. He's written lots of books on it, game-cities.com. And he's a really, really good resource for this sort of information. Yep, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Yakuza games here, because I think they do world design extremely well. So if you're not familiar with them, small city-based open world series developed by Sega, and like I just finished mentioning, you have Kabukicho is the real-life district that they base it off of. They don't call it that. They call it Kamurocho, but it is Kabukicho. They're trying to make it almost, but not quite one-to-one to that. All right, and just to give you some examples, here's the fictionalized Kamurocho there. And that's, what it looks like. So what is its urban functions? Remember, we talked about when you're trying to plan a virtual city, you're thinking about what its functions are. Entertainment, red light district, hostess clubs, bars, restaurants. So it's entertainment, right? It's not worried about providing all, because we talked about a city, it's trying to provide access to food, shelter, water. This is not a whole city, but a district in one. So it's not trying to do all the functions, right? It's just trying to provide this one main purpose. And how is it immersive? So the immersion is allowing the player really the opportunities to participate in the actual day-to-day activities of the real people who live there, right? And this is independent from the actual gameplay of the Yakuza series, right? The actual gameplay is, at least for Yakuza's 1 through 6, it was a brawler, beat 'em up. Yakuza 7 is like a turn-based RPG, but it's surprisingly similar, okay? It's just that instead of punching with the square button, you're selecting an attack called punch, basically, off a menu. So that's the main gameplay, but everything I'm talking about here is apart from that, right? This is in addition to the main gameplay. All the things that you're allowed to do that kind of help simulate living in that world. Like here's the whiskey bar area, which is called the Champion District that I mentioned before. They don't let you go into every single one; they have to pick and choose, but they do kind of pick some representative bars you can actually go into, um, and this is always where I cross my fingers and say, does the video still exist? Yesterday, for the first time, I had one get nuked. Okay, good, it still exists. Sometimes I click in these videos and they were removed off of YouTube for some reason. So all you're getting here, you're just drinking whiskey. It's just text and a nicely rendered, by the standards of that day. It still looks pretty good, right? You're just getting a nice render of a whiskey bottle in a glass, and you're getting a nice description of it. They they don't even notice how they economize that, right? They're not showing the front of you, so they don't have to show the arm or the glass go up to the mouth, right? They just show you from behind there. So it's a nice little scope decision. Yes, you get XP, but it's really just there so you can feel like you're living in this district and you're spending all this money that you don't actually have on like really high end whiskey, right? Like it's just letting you live the dream. And that's why this stuff is in there. And so why is it important to have? Because that whiskey bar stuff, yes, Derek. There is, but it's not really a penalty so much as it is a state they put you in. You do get drunk, yes, after a certain amount. And some of the, not every Yakuza game handles that exactly the same way, but most of them, you'll like, press, left on the stick to move, and you'll move to the right instead a little bit. Like there is some of that, but it's not like it doesn't particularly penalize you. And actually, some of the games have fighting moves that you can only do when drunk. So there's even like positives, right? Which obviously don't take that for real life advice. But yeah, it's they do systemize it. There are consequences, but really it's unimportant, right? Like the fact that they do work in gameplay things is cool, but it doesn't need to be there for like the story they're telling to happen, for the main gameplay they're doing. But they have that kind of stuff in there because it really helps you feel like you're living in that world, that you can do these things. And when you think about it, and I love to point out things like the whiskey bar stuff, because that's all like scripting that you're all quite capable of doing. None of it's particularly complicated. I'm sure at this point, in fact, I would really hope by your junior year, you can make a text box come up with some words, right? You can maybe change the player camera to like focus on something, right? You know what I mean? Like everything that you just saw there is like totally within your scripting capability. Like you don't need to hire a bunch of hardcore, computer scientists to figure that out, right? So but that's what's cool about it. It's so many of the things that make games awesome are all these little things that are stacked on top of each other that kind of interact with each other to create the world. Okay, so I have another video here. Let's take a look at that.
Publisher pretty much lifts the basic skeleton of this area and tweaks parts for gameplay purposes.
Okay, so this is going to show you like the real life space versus the virtualized space. I'm just going to turn the volume down a little bit on this.
If we take a look at the two maps laying on top of each other, we can see that they pretty much share the same street layouts and shapes. Many areas are really easily recognizable, and fans of the series may be surprised to find they don't even need a map to get around. Let's first jump right into the famous Red Gate. Its position, like most of the other landmarks, is exactly where it is in real life. It sits on the end of a busy street that's packed to the brim with bars, restaurants, karaoke booths, pawn shops, discos, and pretty much everything else to keep you entertained for the night. The buildings are covered by bright, colourful signage, and there's people on the street coercing you to come into their establishments. And then once you go towards the north of this road, you'll be able to turn right to come to a shopping district, or straight ahead to Theatre Square, which is called Cine City Square in real life. Theatre Square is sadly very different today than it is in the game. Currently, the building that houses the bowling alley in Yakuza has been demolished. It really changes the feel of the square because you're not surrounded on all fours. And not to mention the stalls they were setting up on the day didn't really help either.
Okay, quick note here. You may notice that like they're actually the A and B comparisons are like a little more. They're like more different than you would think. Part of that is because he's showing stuff from Yakuza Zero, which takes place in the 1980s, right? So like it's the 1980s version versus these modern shots, right? So keep that in mind here. The game that he's using, there's going to be actually some significant differences just from the time periods being depicted.
The Sega arcade still exists in the same position in real life. Although the arcade machines and games are very authentic in Yakuza, what with the UFO catchers and driving games, it doesn't quite capture the scope, and more importantly, the blaring noise you get in those places.
Now, I'll make a comment here. I think that's a good example of like, you don't always want to simulate something exactly right, because when he showed the arcade from the game, it's got some of the background noise, right? But then when he shows the real arcade in that spot, it's like a cacophony of horrible awfulness, right? Like so you don't always want to exactly imitate something.
The real-life equivalent of Nakamichi Street is also very accurate. Like in the game, this road is the main road going from Shinjuku towards the north of Kabukicho. Yakuza Zero is of course set several decades ago, so a lot of the set dressing is completely different. I have seen videos of Yakuza 6, however, and that looks to pretty much mimic the real-life area exactly. When 6 gets its Western release, I might do another comparison video, just to see how they've modernized it. And then there's Shichibuku Street, the street that goes across the map, just beyond Theatre Square. This is also somewhat faithful to its real-life counterpart. There are definitely areas which are instantly recognizable. Most notably for me was the car park with all the host posters on the side.
AKA the parking lots for us non-British English speakers.
Use a bit more creative license, so they had to condense larger parts of the city into the game world. To the very north of Kamurocho is the hotel district and the batting centre that Majima Goro loves so much. Both of these areas have been rejigged some, but you can certainly see where they got their inspiration from. Due to the nature of the red light district, love hotels are in abundance here. The name of the area in-game is therefore not unwarranted. There are also several batting centres in Kabukicho. None of them look exactly like the ones in-game, but creative license and all that. Near the middle of the map, there's Little Asia. There's this tiny area within Kabukicho that has small shack-like restaurants, places that can maybe sit 2 people at once. There are also this kind of noticeable Chinese aesthetic to the decorations. Like in the game, this area is pretty much just a collection of small alleyways in between buildings. Now, I only noticed this after rewatching the footage that I took when I got home, but I'm pretty sure I walked past what would have inspired Elder Chen's restaurant in Yakuza Zero. And whilst we're on the topic of narrow alleyways, let's talk about the Champion District. I'm pretty sure that this area is based on the place known as Golden Gai. Golden Gai is one of my favourite places in Tokyo. It's essentially a cluster of 5 or so alleyways which are packed with tiny bars. It looks almost Blade Runner-esque and kind of sci-fi dystopian. The in-game area doesn't really capture the claustrophobia and density of Golden Gai, but it still is a really good place to see. It's got the large array of DIY bar signs and the small connecting mini alleyways that join up the larger alleyways.
Now, let me make a comment here. What I really love about a lot of this stuff, right, is these are things that you would not even know to try to put in your levels in game worlds if you didn't know they existed, right? Like the super narrow alleys, the restaurants that are like almost a literal hole in the wall, right? You just don't see that here, right? You walk around, West Lafayette, even go to like American cities, you just don't see this sort of stuff, right? And so this is where the study of kind of urban planning, urban layouts, kind of all over the world can really help you make something unique and interesting, right? Because I really like this kind of counter, at least to the kind of American aesthetic, this counterintuitive. You can't drive a car, through this, right? And again, that's part of it too. Cars, there's a lot more things you do on foot in some of these cities that aren't, American. So that again changes how the layouts are, right? So these are really interesting things to consider and think about. All right, I'll let this stop for now, since we do just about have 6 minutes left. Now, the one comment I'll make, you noticed, now it's not just because they're using a game that takes place in the 1980s and contrasting it with the modern day district. Some of it is they aren't going for exact one-to-one. They're more concerned with the function, right? Getting the spirit of the place correct than they are with getting every street light exactly right and having every storefront. This was actually done, and we'll talk about this slide in a minute, but this is a point I think is important to make. They've tried this in game development before, where we're going to try to recreate something perfectly, like every brick. And that was a game called, I think, The Getaway, I think, on PS2 way back in the day, made by I think it was a Sony studio, I think, but they tried to take a small part of London and make it exactly, and it just bloated the development time of that game massively, right? Because that's actually incredibly hard to do. So I think the Yakuza approach is really smart, where they're getting the basic street shapes, street layouts right, they're getting the vibe right, but they're not concerned with getting every single brick exactly right. I don't think that level of detail is particularly helpful in an entertainment product. So some more thoughts about Kamurocho. So here's where we have to balance some of our core level design pillars, right? I always try to build you up from this notion of your level design must support the gameplay, and that's still the correct core supporting pillar to everything we do here. But as you get more experienced, as you get kind of broader in your skill set, you do start to understand ways in which you have to balance this, right? Because these little tiny alleyways, the Champion District stuff, is actually terrible for the core gameplay of Yakuza. And fights do happen there, okay? Because fights are kind of systemically generated throughout the environment. So you do have gameplay here, and it's not ideal. And so sometimes we have to say, okay, look, it's okay if the gameplay here is not optimal because it's also doing these other things, right, that we need it to do in terms of creating the immersion that we want. So again, it's okay to have level layouts, to have world layouts that don't support the gameplay well if it's in service of the genre that you're in, right? If the genre you're in requires that verisimilitude. Now, when you're doing a deathmatch map, it doesn't help you at all, right? Like doing a champion district in a fast-paced deathmatch is only going to hurt you because you're not even spending enough time in the world for the realism to matter, right? I mean, you're just flying through and shooting everything that moves. So it's really using your wisdom to decide when you're going to potentially harm the core gameplay systems of the game because you're trying to do lots and lots of other really important things as well. Now, what the Yakuza games do, they do mitigate this. So the major set piece battles never take place in these areas. So these really tight, cramped areas that are bad for gameplay, you're only going to get the randomly kind of procedurally generated fights here. You're not going to get the big, story-based, super important fights. So they are cognizant of this, right? They don't make you do the big, like a boss fight in there or anything like that. So again, these things are mitigated. And again, I did a podcast episode on Yakuza, so you can check that out once this PowerPoint gets put up to Brightspace if it hasn't been already. Okay, so to summarize everything we've talked about today, almost all games can benefit from the things we've talked about, right? Now, some games need more than others. Your deathmatch maps, I think there's some world building, world design that can be helpful, but obviously those can be a little bit more gameplay focused potentially, right? But when you think about a good Call of Duty map, though, a lot of those have awesome world building elements to them, so and world design elements to them. So it's not necessarily true that it's nothing. But again, it's you can be a little bit more gameplay focused there. Some games, you need to do a lot more scripting to get this in. When you think about the Yakuza examples, there's a lot of things that are based on level layout, making sure that you have these cramped alleyways and the street layouts and things. But when we look at the whiskey bar stuff, which world design includes all of this, right? All of this sort of scripting and light programming that you need to do to have things happen in the world as well. So it really is all inclusive to all the game development skills that you're learning. And so, of course, whatever it is, whatever you're doing, just remember the overall goal is to make the game design better. Just sometimes the game design has in it that you have to have a realistic world, right? That you have to have a world that makes sense for people to live in outside of a game space, outside of gameplay. So that is part of the game design sometimes, and when that is, this sort of world design aspect should be something that you focus on a bit more. So we're going to wrap things up here just by giving some examples of effective world design throughout the history of games. Atari's Adventure, which is just a little dot on the screen, is one of the first games that had world design in it because you had multiple screens, an interconnected world, you had castles. Okay, so you actually had some narrative being implied. So check that out. It's one of the first. It was one of the kind of foundational games that led us to the Legend of Zelda series. Legend of Zelda series is also where a lot of really cool world design happens. Think about Breath of the Wild. It's got amazing world design in it. Grand Theft Auto 3, which was the first of the big open world Grand Theft Autos. Lots of great world design there. BioShock and the Elder Scrolls series, all really cool things to check out for world design. Okay, folks, that's it.
All right. Have a good day.
All right, you too. Yeah.